Hey, Matthew here with your ultimate guide to setting up your controllers for helicopters in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. I'm especially thinking of people who are starting out in helicopter simulation, but there are some tips in here which are good for anyone to think about, especially because Microsoft and Asobo have made some nice quality of life improvements in the controls settings. But it remains a powerful system and it does take some time to set up. And I'm open to your wisdom as well. Let us know in the comments about what works well in your setup. So what I'm going to do here is take you through every control binding I've made to make my helicopter experience easier and more immersive. I'm using this controller setup, a WinWing Orion2 HOTAS, which is blessed with lots of buttons, sliders, switches, hat switches, and knobs. However, even if you're using something more budget-friendly than this, no problem. You can still choose what works for you from the tips I give here. If you're using an Xbox controller or similar, check out this other video I made just for you. In this one, I'll start with the must-haves for stick, for pedals if you've got them, and for throttle controller or collective. Then I'll show you some nice-to-haves, which I find are making life much easier for me. So get a grip, take control, and let's fly. And I'll use this interesting scenery of the Hokkaido spaceport in Japan for this. And let's get started initially with controls that are must-haves, in my opinion, from your Cyclic stick controller, or joystick, whatever. So, I have a WinWing Orion joystick base 2 plus JGrep F1 something, that's all fine. Don't need to worry too much about that. Now, the way the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 controls works is that every hardware device has a number of potential profiles. So, general things that apply to more than just helicopters are under general, and helicopter controls, which is what we're going to be starting with, are in this helicopter controls area. Now, every time, or let's say the first time that you make any changes to your control assignments, it will prompt you to save with a new profile name. And what I've done here is just made a new one called Helicopters Tutorial, just for the purposes of this tutorial. Normally I would use Helicopters All, and if it's just a name, you can call it whatever you want. But I mean, I normally call it Helicopters All, and if I need a very specifically different control scheme for a particular add-on, then I'll just call it that by its name there. So I think, for instance, I've got an MH60 one there, as we just saw when it was clicking past there. There it is. All right, so let's get started with this new blank profile here, Helicopters Tutorial. The absolute essential things you're going to want to add here are two axes. So I'm just going to filter for it here. Set cyclic. So we want the set cyclic lateral axis, that's your left and right, and your set cyclic longitudinal axis, nose up and nose down. So I click into the space, I deflect the joystick, there you go. It's also just gone into the camera there in the background, that's not a problem. And we'll get that in there as well. So we've got two axes in here now. Let's just hop inside and check those are working the way we want them. And I always use the input viewer here. Now, the input viewer is helpful because it shows your inputs going into the simulator, but it also shows potential problems. So if you've got more than one, accidentally you've got more than one device going into your inputs, this will reveal it. So with that one change made, I'm now pulling back on the stick, and that's going in, pushing forward on the stick, that's going in, pushing left on the stick, and pushing right on the stick. So simple, right? So that's your absolute most basic inputs done there. Let's just keep going. So with our cyclic axes in, we need to get our trim capabilities sorted out. So I'm just going to filter for trim in here with all set over there. And we've got lots of options here, some of them quite confusing, but the one we actually want are these two here. Decrease rotor lateral trim and increase rotor lateral trim. That's your left and right. Very confusing names. So this assumes you've got at least one hat switch available on your joystick. So I'm going to go left on there with my point of view hat switch, right on there. And we'll be testing these in a minute. In fact, if I just put that there, I will be able to watch over there. You can see the left and right going there on the trim. And the next ones we want are very confusingly named again: decrease rotor longitudinal trim and increase. So decrease, I am going to go nose down, and increase, I'm going to go nose up. So let's just test that now. I'm going, you can see it moving there on the input viewer and on the helicopter itself. That seems to be fine, pushing forwards, and on the hat switch and the nose goes down. So with our trim in for the Cyclic, although it's called rotor here, this is the way it is, we now also want 2 trim resets. We want the rotor trim reset, so my hat switch also acts as a button. So I click in here, I push down on the point of view hat switch, and now I just demonstrate here by having some nose up Cyclic trim set in, or rotor trim as it's called in here. Push now the rotor trim reset button I just set, and then that snaps back into the middle. Good. So this one, some helicopters might expect input repetition on for this. You might need to hold it down. Cowan Sim is an example of that. No harm in having input repetition on. Input repetition just means that when you keep your finger on the button, it keeps outputting the signal. That's useful in some cases and very unhelpful in others. So we'll just deal with that as we go. The next sort of trim you want, so you just need one more button hopefully on your Cyclic controller, is this one here, quick trim. So I've got another button next to my point of view hat switch, and I've just clicked that in there. And the way this works is that when I have got some Cyclic deflection there, as you can see in the input viewer, I hold down the quick trim, move the stick back into the center, and then that amount of trim is applied so that the helicopter's attitude is maintained whilst the stick position is now centered. So it's a way of preventing yourself from having to hold the stick forwards or back the entire time. Very useful with heavily sprung sticks. And I've got a whole tutorial video on that one feature, although it is also called by another name, and that is called, here it is, Set Helicopter Force Trim Release Button. Very confusing title there. It works effectively exactly the same as Quick Trim. Quick Trim might be slightly more compatible across the MSFS 2024 helicopter fleet. I, at this stage, would recommend having Quick Trim on a button. So that's all our trimming done with the Cyclic controller, and that is the must-haves complete. We've now got Cyclic capacity, and we've got trim capacity, and we've got trim reset capacity. Good. Now, I have bought myself this very nice set of Thrustmaster rudder pedals, which work nicely for helicopters. So what are the must-haves here? It's pretty simple. Let's look in the assigned ones here. I'll deal with these other ones later. The one that you need is the tail rotor axis. Tail rotor axis is the one you need. And with that done, I can go left and right on the pedal, and you can see that moving there, and you can just see the helicopter just nudging around there on the ground a little bit. So that's all fine there. Now, if you do not have pedals, you can still get by with a couple of other means, and it is perfectly acceptable, as I say so many times, for you to use an assistance here that is designed exactly for your needs. That is to go into settings, to go into assistances, and to turn on helicopter's assisted tail rotor. And that will make things much easier for you. If you have that on, you might also consider doing something like putting the tail rotor axis onto, if you've got it, a twist grip on your joystick. So you could twist left and right and have that go to the tail rotor axis. That would be okay. If that fails, you could always look at it, one of these controls here, one of these inputs, the decrement tail rotor and increment tail rotor. By default, that's on the Q and E keys on your keyboard, or those keys on your number pad. You can put those potentially onto a hat switch on your joystick. And if you've also got that assisted tail rotor on, then you should be able to fly without too much problems. Now let's look at your throttle or collective controller. I've got an external throttle with my Orion2 HOTAS kit, and what we're interested in here is to get the collective axis onto your controller. So the collective axis, it's to make us go up and down in our helicopter, we use something called collective. It's not the same as throttle. Yes, I'm using a throttle controller, but in the input I want that device to go into is called the collective axis on our helicopter. Just looking here, now I have got this inverted, which means that when I go full forwards on my throttle controller, that is collective down. When I come full back on my throttle controller, that is lifting the collective to its maximum. So some people will look at that and think, Matthew, you've got that backwards. However, I've done this very deliberately, and I recommend if there's any prospect of you ever getting in a real helicopter, then you will want to seriously consider doing it reverse like what I've got it. Now, my throttle controller is now full forwards, and that collective is all the way down. I pull my throttle lever towards me, and we see the collective controller rate rising up, and now going back down again as I push it forwards. So that is because I want to build in the muscle memory of pushing down to lower collective and pulling back to raise collective, because I don't want to go into a real helicopter one day and do it the wrong way around. So muscle memory plays real tricks on you, and I really highly recommend that you take the time. It's very hard. If you've been doing it the other way around for years, it'll be very hard to unlearn that. But I've gone through that rather painful process, and I don't regret it. So I advise you to do the same, especially if you're starting out with helicopters. So let's put it all together. I lift the collective, I deflect the pedals, I deflect a little bit of right cyclic to anticipate the movement of this H125 when it lifts up, and I keep pulling a bit further on the throttle lever towards me, lifting the collective, and we brake with the ground, and we're looking just fine there. I can get into a stable hover, keeping all those inputs nicely balanced. Now, what about sensitivities? So what I will say about sensitivities is I've done a whole other video on this, so I'll just link that there for you now. If you can, start off with your sensitivities linear, and if that's just too much for you, you can do things like turning them down like that, or better yet, watch my other video where I go into a whole lot more detail there. So with our must-haves done, I've come back to my normal helicopters profile over here. And the beauty of these is that when you start getting all your controls in the way you like them, you can use this cog here and apply this to all helicopters. And the same with your general controls over here. Incredibly powerful feature, so that I don't need to apply these profiles one by one to each helicopter. I can just apply to all from here, which is very helpful indeed. So let's get on to our nice to haves, and for this I'm going to filter by assigned, and I'm just going to talk through them. So set spray I've got on a button. Now can you guess, do I want input repetition on or off? I want it on because I want to be able to hold that button down and have the spray go out. So when I'm doing my agricultural spraying career missions, that will work nicely there. So I've got that under a finger on my stick. Eye tracking and head tracking. So I've got those on 2 buttons on my Cyclic. You could have those on your throttle controller if you want to. I've got some view settings here. So I can go up, no, it's forwards and backwards, Matthew. I can go up or down, and I can also reset my cockpit view over here. I can just translate around here. These are the cockpit view X and Y translation axis. So I quite like having those on a sort of an analog hat switch on my stick. So, and then that same hat switch I push in, and that is resetting my cockpit view. So these are nice to haves. That's what we're talking about here. I've got some drone controls in here. So when I go into the drone camera, my stick can go left and right and forwards and backwards on the drone translation axis. Now let's talk about external view. There's a rather confusing toggle over here called cockpit external view mode that toggles in and out our internal and external view like this. That's external, that's internal, right? Okay, that's fine. It's different from the drone camera, that's the external view. This one, again, you do not want input repetition on here because otherwise it'll just flick you back inside if you hold the button down too long. So input repetition off for your cockpit external view mode toggle. And then when we are in that external view, I have got these another hat switch just going up and down and left and right, like what you can see in the background there. So that's good for doing things like just having a look around your immediate surroundings. You know, we're a little bit restricted in our simulator about what we can see around us, and so this is a bit of a cheat to help with that. Now I've got some slew controls here as well. Again, I will just go outside. Slew is, I've got left and right and forwards and backwards on my cyclic stick. So that's working quite nicely there. That's good for positioning things in a helpful way when you need to move around the airport or just set up a particular practice. You can use those slew controls. Shift Z I've kept on the keyboard as the slew mode toggle. Quick trim is one of our essentials that we already talked about. Set rotor brake. I've got a extra axis on my stick here which does this. I could actually put that down. I mean, we ought not to be using the rotor brake when the rotor's actually, engine's on and we're powered on there, but I can sort of apply a certain amount of rotor brake with that sort of paddle axis that I've got on my WinWing Orion2. That counts as a nice to have. And if you don't have an axis, you could just toggle the rotor brake on and off with another input. We've done the cyclic axes, that's all good. Now, quick reply, what does that mean? So, I've got a two-stage trigger on my stick. So, I push it half in, and I get an input, and I push it all the way in, and I get a second input. So, push it all the way in then is 4 plus 5. Now, I have that onto quick reply, which means if I'm flying a career mission, I can just hold that trigger all the way in, and that does the automatic reply for me. I don't have 4, or the halfway position, mapped to anything. I'm keeping that for vPilot, so that when I'm flying on VATSIM, I can half click in with that trigger, and I can push to talk on VATSIM. So because I don't do VATSIM in career mode, that's a conflict that does not occur in practice. So this is working nicely for me. Okay, what about our rudder nice to haves? Well, on our pedals, I have got if you click on, push down on the top part of the pedals there, I've got another axis, which is the toe brake axis. So when I'm in a helicopter with wheels, which is lots of fun, I can use that to just do differential braking on the left and on the right. So if you've got a nice controller like that, you can do something like that. Get your left brake axis and your right brake axis in. There's another slew axis here, just on the main pedal axis, and so when I go outside and do toggle on the slew mode, I can do that sort of thing with the pedals as well. I find that quite convenient as well for setting up flights just the way I want them. And that already covers our pedal nice to haves. The throttle base, wow, this is somewhat more complicated because there's a lot of stuff going on here. So let's look at our assigned list here, which we already had. So what do I have here? I've got things like autopilot airspeed hold. I've got 3 knobs that I'm using. They're continuous knobs, so when I go left on that knob, I can do something, for instance, like decrease autopilot reference altitude and increase autopilot reference altitude over there as well by putting the button the other way, the knob I should say. And then I can toggle that on and off with that same knob by clicking in. So if you've got knobs that also serve as buttons, then you can do something like this. So that works for the reference altitude and also the increase and decrease heading bug and toggle autopilot heading hold. So that's another knob with that 1, 2, 3 controls or inputs defined from that one. Now my Orion2 HOTAS throttle controller has got several, in fact it's got quite a few, 3-way metal switches that stay in position. So with things like that, I can do things like have the autopilot attitude hold on, which is relevant to some helicopters, for instance the Sim S76. And what else can I do with those? I can just do modes like, well, I've got the flaps. There is a flap switch on here. I know flaps do not apply to helicopters, although that says it does. I've got increase and decrease flaps. All right, gear down and gear up. So that does apply to helicopters because some helicopters have retractable undercarriages, like the Sim S76 again. So what we do here is we put the switch in one of the positions. For instance, I've now got it in down. I click into gear up, and then I move the switch into that position, and then down into the first position. So, and then we find that the appropriate joystick button has been, or as it's called there, has been applied. And the same in reverse. So I've now got the landing gear physical switch in the down position. So I go into up, I click into up, and then click back down into down, and then that joystick button is applied. they can be on input repetition because when it stays in that position, it continues to output, and that goes in there like that. So it's not a problem to leave those with input repetition on. Heading bug we've done. Now, toggle all starters. That's quite a nice one to have on with helicopters. Some helicopters we need to hold down the starter button. That says toggle. Oh yes, okay. So that's a toggle where I've turned the input repetition off. So I just click that to hold it down once, and it toggles all the starters on. So that's what we want there. Another way to handle that is to maybe use something like the set starters, and you just hold it down and that will work like that. So that one's working for me for now, so I'm fine with that. Some helicopters have something called the beep trim on the throttle or engine, and that just allows the pilot to make fine-tuning adjustments on the engine power. And sometimes it's actually in the checklist that once you've completed the startup and you're at 100%, sometimes you beep it up to something like 104%, something like that. And I've just got another hat switch where I've just decided that I can go, it's actually a seesaw sort of thing, this one, and I can just sort of go left or right on that to increase or decrease my engine 1 beep trim. On your throttle controller, it's quite nice having your toggle landing lights and toggle taxi lights. So I've got those at opposite positions on the same hat switch, so I can, I don't know, this will probably be a bit small to show you, but we've got, let's see if I can get right down here. I can just click this. You're looking at these two switches here, on, off by toggling, and then on, and then off just by toggling with the same one. And so I can turn on my taxi lights and my landing lights from my throttle, which I find very convenient. Parking brakes off and on, again relevant to wheeled helicopters, and I've got those there with those two destinations. Cockpit view, yaw axis and pitch axis, I've just got that on a mini joystick on the throttle controller, so I can do that, and then I can reset it back with my reset cockpit view on the stick. Now I've got a whole bunch of drone controls here as well. I've got drone translation speed, increase and decrease drone translation speed, and I've got my toggle drone on the throttle as well. This allows me to do all of the kinds of moves I'm just going to show you right now. So I can go left or right or up or down, and I can also go left or right on that same seesaw switch to zoom the drone view, and also to increase by pushing forwards or backwards on that hat switch the translation speed. So I'll come right back there. Now I'm pushing my Cyclic all the way forwards. It's not going anywhere because I've just turned the speed down. Now I'll just see if I can reset it. And so these are quite useful for a sort of content creator person like me, because I can do all these kind of quite smooth moves. I'm now actually using a balance of a mini joystick, the main Cyclic stick, and a hat switch on this main Cyclic to go up and down like that as well. That's get quite complicated, but it's quite handy to do those sort of quite nice smooth moves. Collective access we already dealt with, and I've got 2 extra sliders on my Orion2 HOTAS. So I've got those on axes going into the throttle 1 and the throttle 2. Again, this is not what controls your up and down in the helicopter. Some helicopters need you to move the throttle levers forwards or back into certain positions, and I find I can achieve that with these 2 sliders on my HOTAS here. So that's working quite well for me. Now, notice that we also have some specific controls here. I actually call on developers to make use of these in MSFS 2024. So you can define specific controls for your machine, in this case specific for the H125. Throttle, twist, grip, decrease and increase. Those are the only 2 that I've thought to define. And that means I can do stuff like this with my hand on the throttle. I can just pull over here and the twist grip moves to idle, or I can put it back onto flight like that. That's quite nice for practicing things like auto rotation, so I don't need to change my view and come down here and manually click that with the mouse. I can just do that from my throttle. And so those are my must-haves and my nice-to-haves with my helicopter control settings. I hope that's really useful to you. No doubt you will have other ones that you've discovered in your travels that work nicely for you in your setup. Your mileage will, of course, vary depending on the controllers that you are using. I feel that I am blessed with this Orion 2 kit because I've just got so many buttons and axes and sliders and extra little bonus things like the mini joystick on the throttle I find very helpful for helping to do the smooth move that I'm showing you now. So yes, if you're finding yourself getting more serious about your flight simulation, a throttle controller with lots of buttons will help you do very versatile things like this. So don't forget, I've got that sensitivities tutorial as well, which you might find useful, and lots of other tutorial content too on my channel. So I hope you'll check that out, and I'll catch you in another video real soon. See ya.